Hello everyone. In this first video of a series of 3 short lectures, we're going to be discussing some of the major themes that have dominated Lovecraft's works and that become apparent in The Call of Cthulhu. The first is the notion of civilization under threat. More specifically, civilization under threat is a subject that he's dealing with. His essential argument is that human civilization and the bastions of civilization that are found in predominantly, given his xenophobic and racist perspective on the world, predominantly in white society, or in white nations or Caucasian nations, is under threat by a kind of savagery that is associated with the unevolved, the degenerate, and what he would believe to be lesser races. So civilization is like the bastion of sanity and life and light on that placid island of ignorance on which we live. It's a parallel to it. It's not the exact same thing because cosmicism is not related to racism or xenophobia in and of itself. It's related to humanity's position within the totality of the universe. However, as a parallel to it, we have this notion that civilized society is under threat and is constantly beset by these destructive forces of chaos that lie on a civilizational level outside of itself. Humanity is in a constant struggle in Lovecraft stories between civilization and savagery, and it's only the actions of a few individuals who have a keen aesthetic and artistic sense and the wherewithal and will to preserve civilization and fend off those demons from the dark and from those degenerate and unevolved places inside our own world, the Earth itself, that allow us to persist as a civilized society. There's a constant conflict in Lovecraft's stories between a kind of primitivism and rationalism, reason and the unevolved and the irrational. Now, on the one hand, rationalism pertains to scientific inquiry against the primitive traditions and superstitions of religious beliefs for Lovecraft. However, it's also figured in racialized terms. Now, knowledge, as we've already discussed in our synchronous lessons, inevitably leads to destruction. Right? As he says in that famous introduction to the Call of Cthulhu, one day the piecing together of disassociated knowledge will reveal to us such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. So there's safety in ignorance and darkness, superstition and fear, because the light of knowledge, the light of understanding, the way in which the universe truly operates and how it is a causeless, careless morass of chaos. All these things will destroy us. They'll drive us to civilizational and individual madness. However, rationalism and scientific knowledge, right, is still better in a sense than the alternative, this primitive superstition. There's something more noble about it, about facing your end and being driven to destruction with your eyes wide open. And we see this kind of conflict and the framing of this conflict throughout the Call of Cthulhu. So when William Channing Webb describes the Inuit, or in the framing of the story, the Eskimo, he says, whilst high up on the West Greenland coast, William Channing Webb had encountered a singular tribe or cult of degenerate Eskimo, whose religion, a curious form of devil worship, chilled him with its deliberate bloodthirstiness and repulsiveness. So we have William Channing Webb, this representative of a kind of academic intellectual elite, entering into the chaotic maelstrom of these degenerate Eskimos' religious practices. And he finds therein a kind of bloodthirstiness and repulsiveness in their devil worship that is alien to his mind and alien to his world, right, his civilized society. Now, in this context, the things that threaten civilization are ignorance and also lesser races. Okay. Now, obviously, I'm not saying lesser races, but in Lovecraft's mind. So take a look at the way in which the Cthulhu cultists are described. Even though they're representatives of, or they are servants of that force of chaos that is beyond us, beyond our understanding and like, the reason why they are so influenced or so readily influenced by Cthulhu is because they don't have the same kind of genetic and intellectual stock as the evolved white European or Americans, right? Those of a kind of Britannic stock or Anglo-Saxon stock. Lovecraft provides these following descriptions for the Cthulhu cultists. Animalistic fury and orgiastic license here whipped themselves to demonic heights by howls and squawking ecstasies that tore and reverberated through those nighted woods like pestilential tempests from the gulfs of hell. So, animal fury, there's something about these human worshippers of Cthulhu that is animalistic and reductive. The savagery that they demonstrate is, in fact, a genetic feature. Void of clothing, this hybrid spawn were braying, bellowing, and writhing about a monstrous ring-shaped bonfire. So all these worshippers are hybrid spawn. In other words, they're not quite human. It's playing upon the tropes of, and you'll forgive me, the mulatto. So they're hybrids, or they're degenerates with this connotation of being somehow racially mixed or racially impure. So these ideas of racial degeneration and the improper miscegenation, the commingling of different races, are at play in Lovecraft. And again, I'm not using these terms as something that I am validating. I am simply describing the reality that we see in Lovecraft as his xenophobic tendencies come to the forefront in his writing. Again, we have to separate those things out from his cosmicism and the like, because that is oriented around humanity's position in the universe, whereas here we're looking inside this meaningless little sphere of humanity and the terrestrial sphere of the known. And of course, the great irony of Lovecraft is that even though he recognizes that all human concerns are ultimately meaningless and that we create these systems to understand the world that are comforting but ultimately irrelevant in light of humanity's insignificance and the cosmic sphere in which we find ourselves, he still holds these things to be so viscerally true and important to him. From a wide circle of 10 scaffolds set up at regular intervals with a flame-girt monolith as a center hung, head downwards, the oddly marred bodies of the helpless squatters who had disappeared. And so this animalistic or orgiastic license that defines these degenerate hybrid spawn has led to these horrible acts of violence. So what we have here is that the reality, in Lovecraft's mind at least, that degenerate lesser races and superstitious beliefs are always threatening civilization and the standards of decency and dignity, art, aesthetics, and intelligence, and society itself from all sides. Civilization is beset at all points and at all times from myriad different forces that seek to destroy it. The realization of our cosmic position above us, the uh, in Lovecraft's view again, those degenerate lesser races beneath the white race that are threatening to, I don't know, impregnate it or to corrupt it civilizationally, socially, or genetically. And also from the upwelling of ignorant superstitions regarding religious beliefs that threaten to topple society because it will drag us back into the dark ages of superstition and fear. Now, again, we don't have to accept Lovecraft's views. In fact, I would encourage you highly to reject them. But we can recognize that this is one of the principal themes and principal subjects that Lovecraft is grappling with in his fiction. And the next few videos, we'll be looking at a few other major